Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and I'm actually very um, interested in this guest that I'm going to be having on today. He goes by the name, the Prophet Shiloh, and we're going to get into that. And this person's making a claim that they are a prophet. And of course, here on Mormon Book Reviews, we've had many different prophet seers and revelators and such come on the program, including Matthew Gill in England, and then we have some people who think that maybe Denver Snuffer is a Davidic servant. Of course, a lot of people, of course, know about the whole Chief Mitiga situation and his claims that we've had on. And so we don't shy away from these types of conversations because they really are a part of the restoration. And so I think sometimes people in the 21st century might feel uncomfortable with these kinds of things. But the reality is that 19th century Mormonism started in the 19th century, and you had the gifts, you had tongues, you had exorcisms, you had the prophetic was part of almost a daily basis within the restoration. It was there early on in the days, and it seems like a lot of those things have kind of been pushed aside. And I think it's really important to kind of go back to what is, primitive Mormonism. What was it like? And I think when we talk to somebody like the Prophet Shiloh, we get that sense. And so we're going to talk about his background, but I also think it's also important that there's this history within the restoration. Of course, many of you may be aware of the book Under the Banner of Heaven, and that may be the first time you've heard of an individual by the name of the Prophet Onias. And I think I want to kind of talk a little bit about this interesting story. And Shiloh here had extensive time spent with the Onias and believes that his revelations are basically part of your canon. And of course, you have revelations that's part of your canon as well, that kind of complements
Mhm.
his revelations. So this is a lengthy intro, but I think it's important to get something established. Also, just a quick reminder for those of you who'd like to participate in the book drawing of Joseph Smith, The Rise and Fall of an American Prophet. I do have an extra copy. So send it to mormonbookreviews@gmail.com. In the subject heading, put in Joseph Smith biography or JS biography and put in your full name and address. And sorry, U.S. residents only can participate in this contest, but we'll be doing the drawing later this month here in July. Well, that with that all set up here, Prophet Shiloh, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure being here.
Now, do you like the Prophet Shiloh, or I mean, how do you like for me to address you?
That's fine. Yeah, that would be appropriate.
Okay, very good. And we'll get into this prophetic calling that you have, but I think it's important to kind of talk about
Mhm.
early days, like you were raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Kind of give us a little bit about your background in being involved in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay, yeah, my parents were both members. I was born in the covenant, and my dad was from the Utah area, and my mom was more of a country girl from Idaho and Montana. And they were very different. My dad was more right wing, my mom's more left wing. So I had kind of an interesting array of influences in terms of worldview and eventually though my mom kind of grew distant from the church and left active participation, and so I was kind of like in a almost what would be more like a part member family. And some of my siblings stayed active, uh my but all of us kind of, we had a little bit of a not the pristine ideal upbringing as Latter-day Saints, but for the most part, I stayed active, and it was, as a youth, I kind of had a time where I was maybe not so grounded in my faith, but also I had some really special spiritual experiences that gave me a definite respect for the Lord, and I read the scriptures from an early age and had a testimony. And I moved out of the house when I was 17, and that's when I read the Book of Mormon like three times. And even though I wasn't going to church actively because I worked on the weekends, I had what I would consider a testimony based more on my own personal study of the scripture and kind of in spite of a more kind of rocky, not so comfortable social experience with the church.
Okay, so just to give me some kind understanding here. So you left the house when you were 17. Where were you living at this time? And how many siblings did you have?
Okay, yeah, I was the middle of five children. So I had an older brother, a sister, and then a younger sister and a younger brother. And I was raised primarily in southeast Idaho in a
Okay, Southwest.
small farming town. So, I worked hard. I was a paper route kid as a boy. I moved hand pipe and worked in the spud harvest and pulled weeds and pulled rock out of fields. I did a lot of the stuff that typically you do when you work on the farms. And my dad was a school teacher, so I had a lot of time to spend at school after hours, and that gave me access to computers at an early age. So I'm a definite computer geek from very early on.
Okay, and now
And
you're
then
so.
we yeah, and then we moved to Arizona where I graduated from high school at Mesa High.
Oh, okay,
And so and that's where I lived when I left home. I moved out to Phoenix and went to a tech school, DeVry Institute.
okay, yeah. And then, did you serve a mission?
I did. Yeah, I got in the mission field late because I kind of, moving out of home, I didn't really have, the typical prodding and, so I was 20 by the time I got into the mission field, but I did it because I wanted to. Nobody really, gave me that pressure that's typical.
And where did you serve your mission at?
I served in the Seoul, South Korea mission,
Okay,
and that
case.
was, let's see, 1990 to 1992.
Okay, all right, yeah. No, few people. First one that comes to mind is Casey Kern. He served his time in South Korea as well. I know a couple other people did there as well. Okay, so
Mhm.
basically you kind of had a rocky relationship with the church, and your family situation was kind of maybe a little unstable, it sounds to me. And then on your own, at the age of 17, you read the Book of Mormon three times, have a testimony of Mormonism,
Mhm.
and then you served a mission, and you did that on your own. You weren't pressured to do it.
Mhm.
Okay, continue with the story.
Let's see. After my mission, I came home and just worked and with my dad, and then I went to a singles ward where I met my wife, and we were married in the Arizona temple. And she's an amazing woman. I felt like I married an angel. She was everything I could have hoped for, and so we had a really good marriage. And unfortunately, though, she did pass away in 2020, so I'm without her now. But we have 10 children together, and I've still got five of them that I'm raising. And she was at my side through all these adventures that I'll be telling you about. She was a faithful companion with me, and and we had to reach this point where we had to break out of kind of that gridlock, if you want to call it that, of the mainstream Mormon worldview. And I had to go through my own kind of restructuring of my testimony.
Okay,
And
and she was there by your side during the whole time. Of course, this can be very challenging when somebody starts questioning the church or maybe does research in church history and comes across things that maybe they weren't exposed to. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a polygamist, and the last couple of years, I hadn't been able to do it last year, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it this year, but I umpire the kickball game between Team Outer Darkness, which is the ex-Mormons, and then Team Higher Law, which is the polygamists. And
oh
they,
wow.
they have a grand time, and it's partly, as when somebody described it to me, it's like, when people start really researching church history, they go one of two directions. They either become a fundamentalist or they become an ex-Mormon. And so there's a lot of actual commonalities between the ex-Mormon community and the fundamentalists, which enables them to get along so very well at this kickball
Hmm.
tournament. And so that was really an eye-opening experience for me to see that. Um, so what was your t when you say you started looking into things, maybe talk about
Hmm.
that because I think it's really important for people to understand your backstory here.
Well, part of my backstory too is my heritage comes from the polygamous colonies in Mexico. And so I have kind of some of that old Mormonism just in my own family lineage. And, my grandmother talked about how, she was, the way she put it, her middle name is Exit. And she got that name because they were exiting Mexico, coming back to the United States when she was just a little baby girl, when the the church issued the second manifesto and the men basically had to put away their plural wives. That was my grandmother's mother was a second wife, and so she had to go. And so she told me a lot of the kind of stories of what it was like and the stories from that her mother told her. And so I had a lot of that old fundamentalist culture just naturally imbued in me. And so, I have that bias or that leaning to start with. And and then, you know, I do my own studying and I read the scriptures and I'm just like I just start finding things. It's like, why do we do it this way? And the scriptures say very clearly that it should be done this way, kind of stuff. And it just kind of eats at me. And like passages where you learn, oh, the church is under condemnation, that means a wrecking ball is going to show up if we don't take care of whatever the Lord's concerned about. And I'm thinking, oh, this is like a really important conversation, let's be talking about it. And then you find out that is not a welcome conversation in the current cultural mindset. And
And,
so
and
then
what's interesting too, because Ezra Taft Benson was saying this in the 80s when he was talking
mhm,
about, so this is not something that's 19th century. I mean, we're talking about,
mhm.
contemporary prophets also talking about the church being under condemnation.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just it alarmed me that there couldn't be those vulnerable, honest conversations within a circle of trusted, stalwart, you know, Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, and so continue with this because I think things really. So when did you first start? Like, okay, we know you started questioning things, and it seems to me like you were somewhat sympathetic to fundamentalism.
Mhm.
For a lot of Latter-day Saints, they just they don't even want to talk about it. They're frightened of it. They want to just sweep it under the rug and not really want to talk about it. But you seem to have been open to the idea of Mormon fundamentalism more so than maybe most Latter-day Saints, would you say?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us about this transition where you're starting to do your research and starting to maybe consider yourself a fundamentalist or somebody who's sympathetic or definitely sympathetic, but somebody who started believing that, hey, I think that maybe the principle needs to continue to be practiced.
I would say that I believed in the mainstream narrative surrounding 1890 and all of that. And I didn't actually really get like really seriously contemplating that there was an actual problem clear until I was involved with the World School of the Prophets with the Prophet Onias.
Okay, well, let's talk about the Prophet Onias. This is I think this is an important oral history that you're going to give here. Who
Hmm.
was the Prophet Onias? Why is it important? Why is he an important figure? So much so that makes his way into probably one of the most read books about Mormonism under the banner of heaven.
Yeah, okay. I I got in touch with this organization in 2008, and that was about 7 years into my kind of like trying to solve the knot in my stomach and searching high and low for truth and this and that. And so that it wasn't like I jumped right out of the church right straight into this group, but I'd done a lot of researching around and but when I got the revelations that they publish, it's called the Second Book of Commandments. And when I read those, to me it was just like, I know this voice. This is the voice of Jehovah. This is my Lord speaking. To me, just like when I read the Book of Mormon, I just had that feeling that just resonated within me that this was like my spiritual home. And so I had a very, like when I first got these revelations, I couldn't put the book down. I read as much as I could, and it took me 3 days, and I worked my way through all of these revelations. And it was like when I got to the end, it was like, oh, I want to read more because he received thus saith the Lord material, just like Joseph Smith and some of the apostles received that we have in the Doctrine and Covenants. And yet it's thus saith the Lord about, a whole array of things that um, some of it was pretty mundane, but some of it was just these beautiful, profound allegories and deep spiritual principles that resonated with me. And so kind of like the church, I had a testimony based on reading the Bible, reading the Book of Mormon, reading the Doctrine and Covenants, and getting that resonation. So my experience with this group really had nothing to do with meeting the people and being impressed with any particular person, but it was these revelations that really just grabbed me at a deep level. And
Yeah, now were you familiar with the history of the Prophet Onias? And I mean, by this time, the book Under the Banner of Heaven had already come out. Were you familiar with the background?
not really.
Okay.
They were very open and transparent with me. They had, I don't know if they still have it, but on their website, 2bc.info, they had a place where they had all these PDFs of all these different documents that were available. And I went through and read all of them. And I didn't really know about the whole Lafferty debacle in any sense of detail. I mean, I think I'd heard about it, but then I found out, whoa, the Laffertys were part of this group. And that was kind of this was after I'd already read the revelations and had a witness of them and everything. And so as I read through this document, I learned about the particulars of it from their perspective, more so than I heard anything else from the outside perspective.
Okay. What was it about those revelations that spoke to you in the sense that you felt like you were reading scripture and true revelation? And did you kind of do like the Moroni's promise, where you kind of just took it to the Lord and asked, are these things true?
Yeah, I would say that it was very much like the Book of Mormon promise, uh, where by the time I got done reading it, I knew, and I prayed and I got a confirmation as well. But the thing that really stood out to me is, and I think this was part of what was really I remember in my younger years, what really drew me in to accept the restoration was how much liberty is so interwoven in everything. And there's this sense of that as I read these revelations of the second book of commandments, it just had that underpinning of making us free with this the way God wanted the Zion society to be. It's like, especially like it clarified things about plural marriage, because I will say honestly that a lot of it did actually bother me, and things that I knew were going on in the realm of the fundamentalists really bothered me. I felt like, if plural marriage is true, surely it has to be something sacred and holy, and a lot of what I saw going on in the name of plural marriage, frankly, to me, was quite revolting. And so it actually ironed out so much of the things. And I'm like, if this is what celestial plural marriage entails, I could support this, which which the way the revelations in the second book of commandments explain it in a nutshell is, first of all, the woman herself who's to become a plural wife, she gets her own revelation independently as to who she's offering herself to in marriage. And then there's the confirmation process, and that the priesthood doesn't have any role to actually dictate anyone's marriage. The service the priesthood provides is they give a ratification and a witness, if you will, the more sure word of prophecy that the revelation she's reporting that she had is valid. And because a woman could want in to be someone's wife when she's maybe made something up or got inspiration from a false spirit or whatever, and they could refrain from ratifying her claim. But it takes away this sense of women feeling like a man can just tell them that they're supposed to be so and so's wife.
Now, do we see this pattern operating with Joseph Smith?
I've looked for it, and the the challenge and the thing that I saw is, without there being a general understanding throughout the society of how this really works, Joseph Smith's at the disadvantage of that he's the one that has to actually teach this stuff. And if a woman doesn't know that it's her right and her privilege and her responsibility to be the one to get her own revelation, then that makes it really hard because you've got a level of consciousness in your society that doesn't even really comprehend how it all works. And so, you've got the problem of Joseph Smith bootstrapping all of this out of nothing.
Okay.
And,
Um,
and, and so, yeah, so it's hard to tell,
okay.
but ultimately, in all the cases that I have examined, the girls were taught, they and then they made the choice, and they prayed about it. And if they didn't get a confirmation or acceptance of it, I don't believe I saw anything beyond teaching and persuasion. Some of it, I think people argue, was manipulative, and I think they possibly could be making a strong case for that. But anyway, as far as I can tell, I think things were done as best as could be done given the circumstances.
Okay, so I want you to talk a little bit about, and if you don't mind me asking, what's the birth name of the prophet Onias? What was his name?
Oh, Prophet Onias's name was Robert Charles Crossfield,
Okay, Robert Charles.
and
Hmm.
yeah, and he passed away in 2018, and he was in his 90s. I'm trying to remember if I knew his birthday, but trying to remember. I don't. I used to know his actual birth year, but it's in the early 19, I think 1920s,
Okay, so I want you
possibly.
to talk a little bit about your experiences and interactions with him. What kind of person was he? What was the group like that he started? What was your involvement? And everything like that. Because I think it's really important just to kind of get some background on him because there's not a whole lot
Mhm.
known about him, and a lot of his followers don't really talk about him. So this would be an opportunity for people to maybe get to know him a little better.
Yeah, there are very few people who know him very well at all because he's not a person who likes any type of public attention. And not, because he's it's just him. He's he was a tradesman. He did roofing was his thing or when he was younger. He's a convert to the church, so he doesn't, have this long history or background within his family. Um, and he's Canadian, and he lived in the Etna area, is where he had a place there. And when he converted to the church, I think he was about 19. And you know how there's polygamists that went to Canada and Mexico. So he actually befriended and got involved to some extent with the polygamist group there in Canada. And he studied into fundamentalism and became a believer in that whole sense of the fullness of the gospel. And I don't recall exactly how long that took. I don't think it happened overnight, but basically he transitioned into uh, being with them, and he had his priesthood bestowed upon him by N. Eldon Tanner, who was in the first presidency of the church. And um, so, he was an elder, and he actually he began receiving revelations. To him, it was just completely out of the blue. He wasn't the kind of person that was, trying to make a name for himself of any kind. Uh, he's the kind of person who's a very peaceable, uh, not really an aggressive person, just very easygoing. And, it's kind of like I've gotten to know enough Canadians. He's definitely Canadian. Very polite, very proper in his speech, very respectful. And I actually didn't, even though I was with this group for, I think it was about 4 years. Most of the time, we're all just kind of spread around, and we had our meetings over the phone every 2 weeks. And so it wasn't really that often that I had occasion to actually be in his presence. But there were several times that I did have interactions with him.
And so it sounds like, now was he himself a polygamist?
There were times that he had a plural wife, but by the time I got involved with the group, he was so advanced in his age that he didn't really have a wife, or he had a woman who helped take care of him, who was basically his wife, but my understanding is it seemed to be more of like a caretaker concubine type arrangement versus an actual wife.
And for him, did he ever have like any angels appear to him? Did he ever have any visionary experiences, or did he
Mhm.
just receive revelations? Maybe tell some of that as well.
Okay, some of it that I know about is only because I read some of their, I guess you could say, internal documentation. And they also have a bunch of revelations that they opted not to publish. And I've had access to those in the past. And it does seem as though, like when he first started getting his ministry, he had kind of a Hill Cumorah Angel Moroni type of experience where he went to the Hill Cumorah, and that was in 1960. And I don't know a lot of the details about that. I would hesitate to say, because I would just be drawing from my memory, and it's been quite a long time since I read that document. But basically, the the vast majority of what he did was just his "Thus saith the Lord"
Okay.
revelatory
Well,
oracles.
just real quick. So I just want to get this on the record. Now,
Mhm.
is this a revelation? Some of this stuff is not public information, but is
Yeah.
this story? So in 1960, he actually goes to the Hill Cumorah and has an experience with the angel Moroni. Do you know if it was like on September, 21st, 22nd?
I think it was. I think it was. And this can be fact checked. I wasn't quite prepared. I wished I had known we were going to go into all of this because I could have. In fact, I could even possibly try to pull up some of these documents. I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
them in
do that.
my
Yeah,
personal archives.
yeah, do that. And
Um,
I'll enable screen share, and you can pull that.
oh, all right. Let's do that. Let me see what I can find here because I do believe.
And actually, while you're doing that, I'm going to screen share real quick your
Mhm.
websites. And so let me know when you're. So he's got the book of Shiloh, .com, and this is some information that you can get about the prophet Shiloh. And then he also has the World School of the Prophets, which is kind of work in progress, which he will be adding to. Oh, and by the way, this photo, I just want you to look at the screen real quick. Is that the Prophet Onias right there?
Yes, yeah, that's we called him Bob.
Bob. Okay,
Yeah,
that's you
that's
with
Bob.
Bob, the Prophet Onias, and so there's some good information here. So this is the website you have, and then let me know when you're ready to pull up your screen, and we can talk about that.
Okay, yeah, I'm still searching here.
Okay, so as you're searching, like I said before, folks, the very first time I ever heard of the Prophet Onias, as well as actually, no, I think I knew about the dream mine because I read a book previous to this that talked about the Bishop Quayle's dream mine. But then I found out that the Prophet Onias had a connection to the Dream Mine. And of course, I've had people on to talk about the Dream Mine, which is very interesting stuff. Of course, Ogden Kraut's son has talked about it, have had him on. And so, within the fundamentalist world, these are important touchstones and important voices that I think are undertold stories. And I think it's important that we get this all out there so people can we can document this history of Mormon fundamentalism here in the 21st century. So, how you doing there, Prophet Shiloh? You find it?
I haven't found it yet.
Okay,
It should have been where I looked, but
it's
I
okay.
don't. When I moved to Thailand, I I have my backup volumes, and I don't have them plugged into my computer in my new setup here yet. So it
So,
would probably. Why don't we see if we can catch this on a follow-up? I
um,
can.
yeah, that's fine. We can do that. We can, yeah, yeah. And then, of course, if you do find them too, you could send those links to me, and we can put them in the description as well, so people can take a look at some of those other things. So, as we continue this story,
Mhm,
you were involved in this group for 4 years. Was
mhm.
Bob still the prophet of this group, the leader of this group when you joined? Like, from what years were you a member of the group?
Okay, it was about May of 2008 when I believe when I started having connection with them. And this is what's interesting is actually Bob was no longer the leader of that group. And this is something that they kind of would contest, but in 2004, July of 2004, the prophet Onias received a revelation where the Lord told him, "You are no longer required to counsel my servants and maidservants, for they have chosen my servant David. And from this time forth, they will seek unto him for their guidance." And so basically, Bob was removed. He was what's called taken, and they were turned over to one of the other men in that group for his leadership. And and then another section just after that one, it said something to the effect that did I not do that which let's see, I should pull it up and read it because I've got it right here. He says, because I think it was in 1980, it was like about 20 years earlier. I think it was 1983, thereabouts. That the group was given this warning that if you don't take these revelations that I'm giving you more seriously, that that the oracle will be taken from you. And so in this revelation it says, "For has it not been fulfilled what I have before told you, that if these people heed not my will, ye shall be taken from among them?" And so he was actually a taken prophet, not necessarily a fallen prophet, but he was taken and removed. And so that was a really weird thing. And I didn't discover that. This was at the time I was in that group, that what I just read, these were not published at the time.
So you joined
And
you joined the group thinking that he was still the prophet of the group.
mhm. Yeah,
When
I
was
joined the group thinking that he was still in charge. He was still um, looked at as the prophet. But then it was weird when I started getting to know these people. It felt like David was the one running everything.
And tell us a little bit about David.
David, he was the bishop, and he's been with Bob, the Prophet Onias, for very early on. I think he came into the group even before the Laffertys were involved with the group. So he's been there a long time. And David, he's he's kind of it, it's hard to describe, but basically he's very friendly and he's personable. But then there was just things about him that just kind of put me on edge a little bit. I just felt like something wasn't all that, I don't know, just he felt off to me. And it's hard to put a finger on, but as I involved myself with that group, I'd have conversations with him, and he was just way too forthcoming about things about other people that you really should keep in confidence. And so I learned pretty quickly to just not say anything to him unless I needed to, because it wouldn't be held in proper, and I think some of that was to try to pull me in and make me feel special, like, da 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 da. And I felt like there's just some stuff that just didn't I wasn't impressed with how he conducted himself.
But you still chose on to you actually stayed with the group for 4 years with
Yeah.
him as the leader. So
Uh,
what's that like?
it was like it was a worse feeling than the church, because eventually it even got to the point where he was essentially making a claim that my daughter should be married to him. I mean, it,
How old
it
was
got to a point where heavy things were being put on me, and I
and
the
just
thing
real
about
quick, if you mind sharing, how old was your daughter at the time?
she was 12.
Okay, so he wanted to marry your 12-year-old daughter.
Well, it wasn't a marriage. Well, I mean, the way it was presented was a betrothal, which I do understand and accept the concept of betrothal. But even so, it's still the girl, it gets her own independent revelation. And even then, the betrothal, the marriage wouldn't take place until, much later. And so, how nice it would be for a girl if it is a revelatory thing, like a continuation of an eternal marriage, why wouldn't you want to know who your eternal spouse is early in life? I mean, there's benefits to that, but so it wouldn't be correct to say that, he was just going to expect her to be a wife right then and there. Um, but nonetheless, it was taught that when a woman knows who her husband is, that in some cases she would actually go to the household of her to-be husband and basically learn about him, his family, and start orienting towards being prepared to be his wife, which that maybe would be a factor in some situations, but I never got the idea that that's what would be, the common practice.
So, and keeping in mind at this point, you're still a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day
Hmm.
Saints. I'll just
Yeah,
get that
active.
down.
Yeah, active LDS throughout.
So you're active LDS, but also participating in this group. And you had also
Hmm.
said that this group actually kind of has a positive view of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So
Yeah.
you being involved in both groups wouldn't have been much of a conflict for you.
No, it wasn't. Well, it was kind of funny. David did seem to kind of have an attitude of disrespect and kind of would mock and make fun of the leaders of the church, which that did irritate me. Not that he didn't make some valid points, but to me it felt like a spirit that just wasn't showing the proper. I mean, Jesus even showed respect to to Caiaphas, who sat in the seat of Moses. But he spoke truthfully. But I don't think Jesus made any sport or made light of it.
So so you're involved in this group, and then what was it? You said a lot of heavy things were put on you that made you decide that you maybe needed to cut ties with these people.
Well, it was definitely the claim that I should cooperate with what they wanted me to do to facilitate this betrothal arrangement.
Okay.
And my response to that was, the revelations say that she will get her own revelation. And I said, I don't consider that my daughter is mature and ready for me to say anything about this at all. So I will not communicate anything to her because, my daughter probably would just want to make daddy happy and not get daddy in trouble. And, I don't, I, I mean, she's a smart girl and she can stand up to dad. I mean, I knew that's not the problem, but you know, I still felt like that would be an undue pressure. And so I shielded her from that entirely. And what's interesting is she actually had a visionary dream um, when there was a lot of pressure on me. And uh, there was kind of like one phase where they put a lot of pressure and I told them no, and then they kind of backed off. And then, I thought things were okay for a while, and then something came up and they came on to me again. And it was about the time my wife was going to give birth to one of my children, and I'm like, I'm not even going to put this pressure on my wife. I'm just going to shoulder this just on my own and give her that reprieve so that she can get through her labor and delivery and recovery from all of that. And so it was about a couple weeks after she gave birth to my daughter, and my older daughter had this dream because I was, praying, when do I put this on my wife? And it was kind of coming to a head. And I was really hoping for, God's assistance in handling this correctly. And just one morning, my daughter came in and basically said that she had this dream, and she was just like shaking, and it was a very profound dream. And she says, I don't know what to make of this, but she basically told about how I had taken her and her older brother and went to David and Kathy's home, and they were going to take care of the children for a while, and I was going to leave them there. And we had left her there and was going to leave, and she said that this thick cloud of darkness just surrounded him, and she just had this powerful feeling like if I left her there with him, that he would have scarred her for life. And she barely was able to get the courage and the strength to ask her brother. And then the brother went and got me, and I came back, and I took the children and left. And so she told me this dream, that he was this dark, scary man that she thought was going to do her harm. And so that was like, I was so thankful. I was like, this is the answer, because God's revelations, as I understood it, said the woman receives revelation. And to me, I'd been praying that whatever is true, whatever she needs to know, please reveal it to her directly so that she knows for herself if there's anything to come of this. And so God answered my prayer and gave her that dream, and that reassured me that I was standing up for her correctly.
So I want to just actually, you brought up your wife, and I wanted to kind of bring her into this story here because
Mhm.
you're on this journey where you're starting to accept these things and accept the prophecies of Onias and all this kind of stuff. How's she processing this? What's her spiritual journey look like during this time?
Yeah. She also read the second book of commandments, and she also got a testimony of them. And she could see that, because she also has polygamy in her heritage too. And so she liked the way things were taught in these revelations, and she got a witness that it that and the things that were the church was called out for, she could see the sense of, and she could see that basically that there's there's one really interesting parable in the second book of commandments called the parable of the deceitful merchants. And basically it likened what the current modern day LDS are buying is these kind of like knockoff gems. They're not the real gem. And they're paying this money to get what they think is this great bargain, but the goods they're being sold aren't genuine. They're not the real deal. And and she and I both could kind of feel like there was a lot of lackluster apathy in the church, and it kind of bothered us because we had a solid testimony, and we wanted to build Zion, and it just didn't feel like there was that that zeal and excitement among the saints. And so these parables like that kind of indicates that things aren't the genuine thing. That was kind of what started our wake up, is it just felt like we were going through the motions and that there really wasn't the Holy Spirit as strongly as we would have expected in our worship experience.
Well, I actually, I think what I'd like to do is have you talk about your visionary experience that you had. And then
Hmm.
we'll use that as a jumping off point for our next episode, where we're going to talk about your prophetic role that you believe that you're going to play as a Davidic servant in
Hmm.
these, what you believe is in these end times, these latter
Hmm.
days. And so tell us about your experience that you had, because within the Pentecostal charismatic world, within the restoration world, there's this idea that these things can and do happen to this day, that
Hmm.
these gifts are available to us, and that there's no cessation that went on. And this is actually arguably charismatic, Pentecostal, and Mormonism are all restorationist movements in that sense. So I now want to
Hmm.
hear about your lead up to your visionary experience and the experience that you had.
Okay, yeah. So I kind of led on about this pressure about this, marriage claim. And along with that pressure, I was deeply soul searching because, here I accepted the prophet Onias as a prophet. And by the way, I was very disappointed that he sided with David. And he kind of tried to stay out of it, but because David was always in his ear, he had the bully pulpit with the prophet Onias, and I was really sad that that he took David's side and kind of abandoned me, is how I felt. Because I was like, I didn't choose David, I choose Onias. So I figured he could still be a prophet, at least so far as I was concerned, because I did not choose David. And so as I'm going through all this pressure, another thing that was put on me was a research assignment to study the events and timing surrounding the coming of the Lord in glory. And so I took this as an official assignment of the School of the Prophets. And so I was working on this project, praying, fasting for revelation, and I wanted to I wanted to see things the way God saw things as much as I could, and I wanted this ability to see like this grand timeline and how it all fit together. I'm a software engineer. I'm very analytical, and so that's right up my alley, is to put all this together. And so while I was undertaking this assignment, I retired from my full-time job in 2009, and I was already kind of like somewhat part-time remote even before then. And so I had a lot of time that I could spend outside of my normal job. And and so one day I was doing this, and and all of a sudden it was just like all this, I call it raw intelligence, just started flooding into me. And it was so intense that I basically just had to lie down. And and the physical, it was like visceral. It affected my whole entire body. Where I'm getting an answer to all of these. I'm trying to figure all this stuff
Yeah.
out. I'm
Well, before
praying.
we, I just want to kind of get some sense here, and you and I had a
Mhm,
Zoom call a couple weeks ago. I kind of prodded
mhm,
you on these questions. So some would argue that you're under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure,
mhm,
and sometimes
mhm,
people will, and you're fasting and
mhm,
you're praying and you got a lot of pressure on you. A
mhm,
naturalistic explanation would be is that you kind of had some kind of break with reality. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I
mhm.
just want to know maybe could this have been some type of mental breakdown that you were experiencing that caused this to happen?
I don't think it was a mental breakdown because the experience was basically fulfilling what I wanted to know. It wasn't like, I mean, obviously it opened up a channel of new information, to just put it in that sense.
Okay, so
But
what was the moment this happened? I want you to describe it. Like you were describing it like you had to lie down, but
mhm,
like what
mhm.
happens? Are you just doing something and all of a sudden, boom, the stuff just hits you and it overwhelms you? I mean, what was going on?
I was reading and studying and researching biblical stuff, and I kind of felt like God was guiding me in what I was looking at. And it just kind of was like, oh, I don't know if you've probably had this experience where you feel spirit led, and you're looking at this and putting things together in a new way that you haven't seen before. And that kind of upwelling of, oh, this is, oh, I'm on to something here, and this is great. And then it crescendoed into uh this it's like all of a sudden, because I've been studying a lot for like 7 years, and my shelf was like really full of a lot of stuff. And it was like finally, like a lot of things that I had been poring over and reviewing for the last several years, just like all started to come together. It was like this massive epiphany that was so intense, it just was all consuming viscerally.
Okay, so that's and then so th at this point you're not being did you have any visitations from angelic beings? Did anything like that was going on at the
I
time?
I didn't I didn't have any experience like that. I would say that this light came into the room and that there was this person, like the Angel Moroni visitation. That is, or like even what Joseph Smith said in his Sacred Grove experience, where he saw these personages and heard distinct, like, voices speaking in, the whatever, probably the English language. It wasn't that, and I do consider that I had a vision. um and I'm and so and I honestly think that that's what Joseph Smith also had. I think a lot of LDS are actually mistaken to think that there was truly like a physical being present. I honestly think that everything Joseph Smith experienced there was also visionary. But in my case, I I didn't see a personage. To me, it was just the scriptures just completely came to life, and it was like I was plugged into a fire hose of intelligence that just.
Okay, and then how long did this experience last?
Well, actually, it lasted uh, over a long period of time, that I would do these study sessions, and I would go into this state where it built and built and built, and all the different scriptures I would feel inclined to read in another area, and then more stuff would just be flowing out. And it was like almost anywhere I studied in the scriptures, it was just I was getting plugged into the true understanding behind the what I call the veil.
Would you,
It's like there's a veil throughout the scriptures, and that veil for me was removed.
and so would you say this is almost like a continuing open vision that was whenever you were
It
engaging these studies, you would have this open vision basically occurring and it would build on each build.
Yeah, and I would spend all day studying, and the next day I would get up and it lasted for about 3 weeks.
Okay, now did you tell anybody about what you were experiencing during
I
this time?
I I talked about it with my wife, but I didn't really talk about it with anyone else. I felt like I needed to stay just very much cocooned during that time.
And so after this 3 week period, what going in before you had your first vision, and as the vision continues for this 3 week period, tell me about what you were before and then what came after. Like, how would you describe like did you come out of it like feeling like you're a completely different person or that you had insights here that you never knew about or how, but just maybe talk about like you going into it and then the experience
Mhm.
ending and just kind of bookend it that way.
Yeah, definitely both accounts. I felt very different on the backside of that. And certainly I felt like, well, basically what I received as the major part of this is the book sealed with seven seals was opened to me. And and that's basically, I realize that's a very huge claim
So the seven
that,
seals from the book of Revelation, you claim
yeah,
to they were opened up to you.
what the seven seals are, how to decipher their content, how to apply that intelligence then to everything I read in Holy Writ. It's like once you understand what those seven seals are and how to incorporate them into it's like a paradigm shift. Then the scriptures just come alive in a whole new way. It was completely transformational.
Now, how was this received by the group?
They rejected it.
Okay. And then okay, so they rejected it. So now you
Mhm.
have and including the Prophet Onias?
Yes, he also rejected it.
Okay.
However, I don't even know to what extent that he understood it because David was very careful to control all of he middlemaned every bit of communication. And I wrote a 5 page, just small portion of what came out of my visions to submit to them. Because the way the school works, anyone can receive revelation. And if it pertains to like new doctrine or to anything outside of your own stewardship, you can submit it to the school for their ratification. Just like a woman receiving a marriage revelation, she would submit that for ratification. And so I wrote up a 5 page document basically giving some of the meatier but directly easy to understand I guess you could say the paradigm shifted. The crux of it is that on the days of creation are the seals, the 7 days of creation, and that each day represents a millennium of world history. So seal one is day one, and that's for the first millennium, and the second seal, the second day, the second millennium, and so on down the line. And that day six has man, and that's the Father's kingdom. At the end of the sixth millennium, the Father would establish his kingdom, and it would be the new Adam and the new Eve in the new world. And that's essentially the foundation of the LDS restoration is that the Adamic order is Adam. It's a priesthood body, and that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the mother, the Eve of the new world. And then there's a whole parallel of how you can see that, the saints transgressed in the Garden of Eden in Jackson County, Missouri, then the expulsion, the extermination order. And the Doctrine and Covenants says in section 101, they were driven out in consequence of their transgressions. And then in Nauvoo, they're clothed in the garment. And, Adam and Eve were, were clothed in the garment after they were driven out. And, and all of these details, I mean, every detail of the Adam and Eve narrative, there's a parallel in LDS history. And so if you're looking for the king of the new world, you don't need to look any further than the LDS restoration. So I wrote up a paper, submitted that to them, and it was shot down.
So then just real quick too, just do you believe in the Adam God doctrine?
I understand it differently than others do. So I have my understanding of it that makes sense once you put it in the context of that Joseph and Brigham would have been talking about the Adam who's right there alive as a flesh and bone being in America. And instead of making it the Adam of 6,000 years ago, when you understand they're talking about the man or Adam extant in this modern time, then it makes sense.
Okay. And I'd like to maybe explore that in some
Hmm.
future episodes. I just wanted a couple follow-up things that I've been thinking about
Hmm.
that I wanted to ask you before we wrap this up
Hmm.
is one, I wanted to know when Onias went to Hill Cumorah in 1960, was that was he presented any plates or any records?
I don't believe so. I don't think I think it was just part of what he needed to anchor him that God is calling him to be his mouthpiece. And basically, part of his claim is that he claims to be the Elias who's preparing the way for the one mighty and strong, who will set the church in order. And within his revelations or prophecies that this would be Davidic servant comes into the school and actually learns and 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 understands things and the school teaches him and then he gets his calling and so the thing that's interesting is I'm probably the only guy that has been involved with that group that actually qualifies.
Okay. And that's but they also reject you.
They did.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they
And
did.
what does it, just as an outsider, I'm thinking, okay, early days, restoration, Joseph Smith has witnesses. Joseph has people that are basically, testifying that they have a testimony of the restoration of Joseph Smith as a prophet. What does it say to you when that's not happening to you?
Well, I know that to make a full restoration, that obviously has a lot of importance surrounding that. And my calling is more just to be a lawful continuation of what Joseph received. And the parameters for me to be a successor, a rightful successor in the position that I am, that's something we could go into. Um, and so I don't see that I needed, like I don't have a Book of Mormon that I'm purporting. I just simply have thus saith the Lord revelations at this point. And
Okay.
then of course, the book sealed with seven seals, everybody now is, I don't keep it secret. I say, here it is. I'm going to help you read it for yourself. And then, any person would realize, hey, if this is it, this is the root of David that we're looking for because it says only the root of David can loosen those seals and bring forth that content.
What about the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon? Have you had the opportunity to translate that?
Okay, as far as this book sealed with seven seals versus this idea that the Book of Mormon is sealed. Actually, the book sealed with seven seals implies that all Holy Writ is sealed, including the Book of Mormon. So, in other words, if there are more plates yet to come forward, that would just be an additional extension of the Book of Mormon, you know, arcana, we'll call it. But as far as what's sealed, this unseals everything, Book of Mormon, whatever you're reading, because it's like a layer of symbolism. I call it the Adamic meta language of symbolism. That once you know how to incorporate that additional layer of meaning behind these symbols, then more information comes out of the scriptures.
Have you used
And
anything like a seer stone or a Urim and Thummim?
I do have a Urim and Thummim, although I have not been instructed to use it. I also have a high priest breastplate In fact, let's see what I've got. Oh, it's right back there. I don't know. I could grab it. Let me set my headphone
Yeah,
up.
yeah, definitely want to see this. Folks, I find these conversations interesting and okay, yeah, that's definitely a breastplate, priestly breastplate.
I
Yeah.
just put this on. I will use this at times,
Okay,
and
so did you make
it
that
comes
yourself?
no, it comes from Israel. It's actually made as genuine as a high priest breastplate as they could they could put together.
So
So it has all the genuine.
were you directed by God to go get that breastplate?
I felt some inspiration to do it, but I was not given a thus saith the Lord instruction.
Now, some would say that the Urim and Thummim would be some of those objects on the breastplate. Are you saying you have a separate Urim and Thummim that you say you haven't used, and maybe talk a little bit about that and where did you get it?
I got it along with the breastplate kit. And so I just have it from I think it was the Jerusalem Foundation or I wish I could remember the name for sure, um, but even though I have it, I never felt that because I've been receiving thus saith the Lord revelations already. It's
Mhm.
not like I got these and then started getting revelations, but I do want to do everything that I can that would enhance or help assure that I'm getting because receiving a revelation, it's not as cut and dry as people might think. It does involve uh, it, it's kind of like in the Doctrine and Covenants, there uh, the you get this flow of raw intelligence and you don't always get the words and you kind of have to work to get the words just right before you get the clearance and more comes. And so, I want to be able to try to increase that revelatory channel. And so that was some inspiration behind getting those. But the Lord's never said, I actually need to use those devices.
Well, and even within the sense of Joseph Smith, that it was seemed like the early days he needed objects, and then he no longer needed them. Maybe so. In other words, they were used at the beginning, but later on he didn't need to use objects anymore. And it seems like you're in that place that Joseph was later on in
I
his
think
ministry.
I think so. Yeah, I think that would be accurate because another thing about my experience that happened, I believe that see, because I was at the age in my life that um, Joseph Smith was when he passed. And my understanding is that Joseph's spirit is indwelling me and that I'm facilitating him continuing on with his mortality.
Okay, and so you actually so in one sense the spirit of Joseph Smith is indwelled in you.
Yeah, that I consider that I received a quickening and that basically he's my direct upline. And then that Joseph's direct upline is the Savior and up from there through the Father and, up into the vine.
Now, do you
So
believe that Joseph Smith is the Holy Spirit?
I do consider he's the presiding spirit in the host of Michael, and that Michael is the third of the creation Godhead, Elohim, Jehovah, Michael. And so I do position him in that third personage of the Godhead. Yes.
And can other people have received the indwelling of Joseph Smith other than
Yeah,
yourself?
actually, yes. He does not have to minister to me exclusively. So that is correct.
Okay. And then one final question, just to I wanted to ask, and then again, we're going to have you back on because this was really
Mhm,
fascinating. Because I want
mhm.
to then kind of talk about. I want to, the next conversation is I want to be talking to the prophet Shiloh, and
Okay.
presumptively, I would also be talking to the indwelling or of Joseph Smith or the conversations that you have with him. I'd like to maybe see what that's like, what that looks
Okay.
like.
Yeah,
And
that'll
so,
be interesting. I'm
and
not
so,
sure how it'll go, but
well, I might even ask. Well, we'll see how this goes. We'll talk about it some more off
Mhm,
camera. Uh, but one last thing I want to ask you was when the Lafferty brothers were involved with the group,
mhm, mhm.
did Prophet Onias or his David, did they ever receive when they first were engaging? Then where was their priesthood discernment on these men? Why would
Hmm.
they have taken them in if they had discernment like they should have? How could the Lafferty brothers have been so ingratiated into this group for a while?
Well, my understanding is the Lafferty brothers had received these revelations and they had submitted them to the school for ratification. And those revelations that basically called for them to do the heinous thing that they did. And the school rejected those revelations. And that, of course, then became a power struggle because the Lafferty brothers became insistent that their revelations were correct.
Did the
And
School
so
of the
there's
Prophets accept any of the revelations, maybe some of the early on ones?
none that I know of.
Okay.
And the idea I get too is that they weren't long-standing members of the school, and that in fact they, because of that power struggle, they actually dismissed them from the school. And so as far as I'm concerned, now I haven't read the book or even watched Under the Banner of Heaven to this day, which is
Oh,
kind of weird.
yeah. I'm surprised.
I mean, you'd think I would watch it, but I've just never bothered. I don't know. Because I mean, when I know him personally and I never felt like uh, they were complicit in any way. In fact, is what I understand is they were actually cooperative with the prosecution and helped considerably to land a conviction.
Well, and I'm just going to kind of ask you a question because some people would probably
Mhm.
ask this and they'll be saying, well, the
Mhm.
School of the Prophets rejected the Laffertys. What does it say that the School of the Prophets rejected your work?
Well, yeah, see, I mean, that's the thing is they rejected me, but I can show how basically Bob Crossfield's or the Prophet Onias, his revelatory channel had actually been removed in 2004. So there's definitely reason to believe that there's a cloud hanging over their validity at that point.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, we'll get into that on our next episode. Prophet Shiloh. I
Okay,
want to thank you
great.
so much for coming on the program today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And I just want to share real quick the two websites that are available is thebookofshiloh.com and also the World School of the Prophets. Also, I wanted to ask you a question. You said
Mhm.
you typed up a 5-page like
Oh,
summary.
yeah.
Is that something that's available on your website?
Yes. Do you want me to type that in the chat real quick? I've
Yeah.
got it's a Google Doc that's publicly accessible, and you can get there by going to tinyurl.com/sealed portion intro. I think I spelled that right. If you go to that URL, then you'll get to it's like a 35, 36 page Google Doc. And it kind of walks you through how you can open up the seven seals for yourself. And it ultimately walks you through like how Adam is the priesthood, how Eve is the church. And it also gets into that the Son of Man actually did come in 1890, but because of circumstances, he came as a thief in the night, and people just didn't have oil in their lamps and totally missed it.
And would that have had anything to do with any of the Native American dance stuff that was going on back then? That
I do believe something of importance was surrounding the Walker Lake Wavoka incident, but this is completely distinct from that.
Okay, so this is this here, and I'll make sure we have a link to this in the description as well. So I just got this open here. So people want to just kind of get the summary of your thus saith the Lord, your revelations. That would be a good place to perhaps be a good introduction to your work. And then, of course, we have your website and any other items that you want to have in the description. I will ask you to send them to me, and I'll make sure they're all included in the
Okay.
description. So this was a great conversation, a Sunday afternoon well spent here at MBR. I know it's after midnight or well 1 o'clock in the morning or so in in Thailand, and we'll continue this conversation. I think you bring a lot of interesting ideas to the table. Uh, I've done some of my due diligence on you. to a certain degree. And I feel comfortable having you come on this program. I tell people I'm not going to put malevolent people on here that would do harm. I don't sense that from you. But I'm not endorsing you or anything. I'm just giving you
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
opportunity to come on and tell your story because the Davidic servant, one and mighty strong, all these are ideas that are out there that a lot of people are anticipating. A lot of people believe that we live in the last days and they would expect a Davidic servant to come forth, and people are anticipating it. And I'm not going to discriminate against who is or isn't. That's not my role because I'm an outsider. And so I'm going to take your claims as seriously as anybody else's claims. Just try to be unbiased in how we do it. So, folks, we're going to have links in the description to everything we talked about, including links for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel. It's always greatly appreciated when we receive a donation. Really couldn't do it without you. And also, I would like to hear your comments. Also, maybe in the comment section, if you have any questions for the Prophet Shiloh, that might be a good place for our next episode to talk about that. And I'll probably put that out on social media. Any questions people have for the Prophet Shiloh in these, what many people believe we are living in the latter days. The thing is, things are winding up. Things are going on in the Middle East, and a lot of people anticipate the soon coming of Jesus Christ, and that's including in my world as well here in the evangelical world. So, I'd love to hear your comments, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.